Close your eyes and let your mind drift back through the mists of time, far beyond recorded history, to an era when the world wore a different face. Imagine, if you will, a time when great sheets of ice stretched across continents, when mammoths roamed frozen plains, and when our ancestors huddled around fires that seemed impossibly small against the vast cold darkness of an ancient winter that lasted not months, but millennia. Tonight, as you settle into the comfort of your warm bed, we embark on a journey of imagination, a gentle exploration of one of history's most intriguing what-if scenarios. What if the magnificent pyramids of Egypt, those eternal monuments that have captivated humanity for thousands of years, were not the grand tombs we believe them to be, but something far more humble and infinitely more human? Shelters built during the last great ice age. This is not the accepted view of historians, of course. The pyramids were built around 4,500 years ago, long after the ice age had ended. But tonight, in the realm of dreams and gentle speculation, we allow our minds to wander down a different path, exploring how ancient peoples might have survived in a world locked in ice, and how structures we think we understand might tell a completely different story. Let the rhythm of these words carry you into sleep as we explore this alternate history together, where survival and ingenuity shaped monuments that would outlast the very ice age that created them. 25,000 years ago, the world entered its final and most severe glacial maximum. Picture, if you can, a planet transformed, where today we see the bustling cities of London and New York, vast ice sheets stretched to the horizon, some over a mile thick. The oceans had retreated, their waters locked in continental glaciers, revealing land bridges between continents and transforming the very geography of Earth. In this frozen world, our human ancestors faced challenges that seem almost unimaginable today. The average global temperature was perhaps 12 degrees Celsius colder than it is now, enough to turn temperate forests into tundra and to push the boundaries of human survival to their absolute limits. Yet humanity endured, adapted, and in some remarkable ways thrived along the banks of what we now call the Nile River, but which was then a very different waterway flowing through a landscape of steppes and scattered woodlands. Small groups of hunter-gatherers made their homes. These were not the primitive cave dwellers of popular imagination, but sophisticated peoples with complex tools, intricate social structures, and most importantly for our story, remarkable engineering abilities born of desperate necessity. Though winter that year was particularly harsh, even by Ice Age standards. Archaeological evidence suggests that around this time, global temperatures dropped even further, pushing these ancient peoples to the brink of extinction. Food became scarce as the herds of Ice Age megafauna moved further south, following the retreating grasslands. Wood for fires became precious as the forests thinned and died back under the relentless cold. It was during this crisis, our imaginary history suggests that a brilliant leader emerged among the people living along the Proto-Nile. Her name has been lost to time, but let us call her Khaemwaset, the one who appears in splendor for the ingenuity she would display in saving her people from the advancing ice. Khaemwaset had observed something that others had missed. While traveling along the river valley, she had noticed that certain shapes in the landscape seemed to shed snow and ice more effectively than others. Sharp angles, she realized, created wind patterns that prevented heavy snow accumulation. More importantly, she had discovered that triangular structures, even small ones, remained warmer inside during the brutal winter nights. The concept was revolutionary. Instead of hiding in caves or building temporary shelters that the harsh winds would tear apart, why not construct something permanent? Something massive enough to house not just a few families, but an entire community. Something built to last not just a season, but generations. But how could a people with stone tools and organic materials possibly build something large enough to serve as a shelter for hundreds of people? The answer lay in a resource that surrounded them everywhere they looked: stone. The limestone quarries near what we now call Giza held different secrets in the Ice Age. The stone was harder then, frozen and strengthened by millennia of extreme cold. But it was also more brittle, easier to break along natural fault lines. When the ancient builders learned to work with the rock's natural properties rather than against them, Khemwaset and her people didn't begin with grand ambitions of building monuments that would last until the stars fell from the sky. They started small, with survival. The first pyramid was little more than a pile of stones arranged in a rough triangle, perhaps 20 feet on each side at the base and 10 feet high. But inside this humble structure, families could huddle together, sharing body heat, protected from the cutting wind that could freeze exposed flesh in minutes. Word of this innovation spread along the river valley. Other groups began constructing their own stone triangles, each learning from the mistakes and improvements of others. They discovered that the internal chambers worked best when designed in specific proportions. Chambers that were too large couldn't be kept warm by body heat alone, while chambers that were too small became cramped and dangerous if anyone became ill. Over the generations, as the Ice Age persisted and showed no signs of ending, these survival shelters grew larger and more sophisticated. The builders developed techniques for moving massive stones across the frozen ground, using sleds and rollers made from the scattered bones of mammoths and other Ice Age giants. They learned to cut and fit stones with remarkable precision, not for aesthetic reasons, but because poorly fitted stones allowed precious heat to escape and deadly cold to seep in. The Great Pyramid that would later puzzle archaeologists began as one of these community survival shelters, built by a group of perhaps 300 people during a particularly harsh winter about 18,000 years ago. What made this pyramid different was the ambition of its builders. They didn't just want to survive one winter, they wanted to create a permanent refuge that could house their people through whatever climate catastrophes the future might bring. The base of this great shelter measured nearly 750 feet on each side, not because of any mystical significance, but because that was the size needed to house their entire extended community, along with storage for food, tools, and fuel. The interior was honeycombed with chambers and passages, each serving a specific purpose in the fight for survival. The largest chambers, near the base, served as communal living areas where families gathered during the worst storms. Higher up were smaller rooms used for storage, dried meat, gathered seeds, and precious fat for lamps that provided both light and heat during the endless winter nights. Near the top were chambers reserved for the sick and elderly, where the warmest air naturally rose and where the community's healers could work without the constant disruptions of daily survival activities. But perhaps the most ingenious feature of these ancient shelters was the ventilation system. The builders had learned that simply sealing themselves inside a stone structure was a death sentence. Without fresh air circulation, the inhabitants would suffocate or succumb to the buildup of deadly gases from their fires. So they constructed a series of narrow shafts that allowed fresh air to enter while preventing heat from escaping, a system so sophisticated that modern engineers marvel at its effectiveness. Imagine, as you drift towards sleep, what life must have been like inside these ancient shelters during the depths of winter. The wind outside howls with a ferocity that seems to shake the very foundations of the Great Pyramid. But inside, protected by tons of carefully fitted stone, the sound is muted to a distant whisper. Families gather in the communal chambers, lit by the flickering flames of fat lamps that cast dancing shadows on the walls. Children play games with carved bone pieces while their parents work on essential tasks, repairing tools, preparing food, weaving baskets from dried grasses stored during the brief summer months. The elderly share stories of times before the Great Cold, when their grandparents spoke of forests and abundance that now seem like impossible dreams. The daily routine in these shelters was governed by the harsh necessities of survival. Each morning, work parties would venture outside to tend to the essential tasks, checking snares for small game, gathering frozen wood for fuel, maintaining the external structures that protected the pyramid's entrances from snowdrifts. These expeditions were dangerous. The cold could kill in minutes, and more than one brave soul was lost to sudden blizzards that could appear without warning. Inside the pyramid, other work continued. The grinding of grain took place in specialized chambers designed to contain the dust and noise. Food preparation was a communal effort, with large hearths built into the stone structure itself, their smoke carried away through ingenious chimney. Systems that the builders had perfected over generations of trial and error. The upper chambers served purposes that might surprise us. Far from being burial chambers for pharaohs, these were the domains of the community's most essential members during the winter months. The healers worked here, tending to the inevitable, injuries and illnesses that accompanied life in such harsh conditions. The toolmakers crafted the implements that meant the difference between life and death. And the story keepers, perhaps most importantly of all, passed down the crucial knowledge that allowed the community to survive. Which plants were edible when other food ran out, how to predict weather changes by the behavior of animals, the techniques for building and maintaining their stone sanctuary. Water was a constant concern. While ice and snow were abundant outside, the process of melting enough for a large community while conserving precious fuel required careful planning. The builders had constructed collection systems that channeled melted snow from the pyramid's exterior into internal reservoirs, but these had to be carefully maintained to prevent contamination. Perhaps most remarkably, these ancient peoples developed a sophisticated understanding of what we now call thermal mass. They learned that the massive stone structure, once heated, would retain that heat for long periods. During brief warm spells, they would build large fires in central chambers, heating the stone itself, which would then radiate warmth for days. After the fires had died down, the social organization within the pyramids was necessarily complex. With hundreds of people living in close quarters through months-long winters, strict rules governed everything from food distribution to conflict resolution. Archaeological evidence from other Ice Age sites suggests that these communities developed sophisticated leadership structures, often with councils of elders making decisions collectively rather than relying on single authoritarian leaders. Winter. Nights were long. In the depths of the Ice Age, darkness could last 18 hours or more at northern latitudes. These long nights were filled with activities that maintained both physical and mental health. Music, played on instruments carved from bone and horn, lifted spirits during the darkest times. Storytelling served not just as entertainment, but as a crucial method for passing down survival knowledge from one generation to the next. As you sink deeper into restful sleep, let your mind marvel at the ingenuity of these ancient builders. Every aspect of their great stone shelters represented solutions to problems of survival that modern people can barely imagine. The exterior slope of the pyramids wasn't chosen for symbolic reasons. It was the optimal angle to shed snow and ice, while maintaining structural stability. Too steep, and the structure would collapse under its own weight. Too shallow, and snow would accumulate on the surface, adding dangerous weight while blocking the carefully designed air shafts. The precision of the stone fitting wasn't motivated by aesthetic concerns, but by the desperate need for thermal efficiency. A gap between stones that seems insignificant in warm weather becomes a lethal breach when the temperature outside drops to 40 degrees below zero. The builders developed techniques for shaping stones that wouldn't be matched again until the Renaissance, not because they were showing off, but because their lives depended on getting it right. The internal chamber system represented perhaps the most sophisticated understanding of thermodynamics in the ancient world. The builders had discovered that warm air rises, but they also understood that different activities generated different amounts of heat. Sleeping areas were positioned to take advantage of rising warm air from cooking and work areas below. Storage. Areas for perishable goods were located in the coolest parts of the structure, creating natural refrigeration that could preserve meat for months. The famous King's Chamber and Queen's Chamber of the Great Pyramid take on entirely different meanings in our Ice Age scenario. These weren't burial chambers at all, but specialized survival spaces. The King's Chamber, with its precise dimensions and acoustic properties, may have been a meeting hall where the community's leaders could gather to make crucial decisions, without being overheard, important when those decisions might involve rationing food or deciding who would risk their lives on dangerous expeditions outside. The Queen's Chamber, smaller and with different ventilation, might have served as a medical facility, where the sick could be isolated from the general population, a crucial consideration when an illness sweeping through the confined community could mean death for everyone. The mysterious shafts that extend from these chambers to the exterior weren't aligned with stars for religious reasons, but were carefully angled to provide optimal airflow while preventing the entry of snow and rain. The builders had learned through bitter experience that poor ventilation could kill as surely as the cold outside. Even the famous capstone or pyramidion that once crowned these structures served a practical purpose in our scenario. Made of harder stone or even metal when available, it was designed to conduct lightning strikes safely to the ground, a real concern for the tallest structures in an otherwise flat landscape during the violent thunderstorms that occasionally broke the winter monotony. The causeway and associated structures that archaeologists have found around the pyramids weren't religious procession routes, but practical infrastructure for survival. These were protected pathways that allowed the inhabitants to travel between structures during blizzards, complete with supply caches and emergency shelters spaced at intervals that could be covered even in the worst weather. The Sphinx, in this alternate history, takes on a different meaning entirely. Rather than a religious monument, it was a practical structure, a large shelter built into the bedrock, designed to house the community's most precious resources: pregnant women, nursing, mothers, and young children. Its leonine form wasn't symbolic but functional, designed to deflect wind and provide multiple chambers at different levels for different needs. The alignment of the pyramids with celestial bodies, which has mystified researchers for centuries, makes perfect practical sense in our Ice Age survival scenario. These ancient peoples weren't building monuments to the gods. They were creating the world's first sophisticated calendar systems, essential tools for survival in a world where timing meant everything. In the harsh world of the Ice Age, knowing when seasonal changes would occur could mean the difference between life and death for an entire community. The brief summer months were crucial for gathering food, repairing structures, and preparing for the next winter. Being caught unprepared by an early winter could doom everyone in the community. The builders of these stone shelters became master astronomers, not out of religious devotion, but out of desperate necessity. They learned to read the stars like a cosmic clock, predicting with remarkable accuracy when the worst weather would hit, when brief warm spells might allow for essential outside work, and most importantly, when they could safely venture out to establish new shelters or trade with other communities. The famous alignment of the Great Pyramid with the constellation Orion takes on new meaning in our scenario. Orion's position in the sky was a reliable indicator of the progression of winter. When Orion reached certain positions, the builders knew that the worst cold was still ahead, or that the first hints of spring might be approaching. This wasn't mystical knowledge, but practical astronomy that could save lives. The internal chambers of the pyramid may have served as primitive observatories, with the precisely angled shafts providing clear views of specific sections of the sky. During the long winter nights, designated community members would maintain regular observations, tracking the movement of stars and planets to maintain their crucial calendar systems. The precision of these alignments suggests that the ancient builders maintained their astronomical observations over many generations, refining their understanding and adjusting their structures accordingly. This represents a continuity of knowledge and purpose that speaks to the fundamental importance of these shelters to the community's survival. Modern archaeoastronomers have noted that the pyramid's alignment points to celestial events that would have been particularly significant in the Ice Age climate. The heliacal rising of certain stars coincided with brief warming periods that allowed for essential outside work. Other alignments predicted the onset of the most severe weather, warning the community to seal themselves in and conserve resources for the trials ahead. The mathematical sophistication evident in the pyramid's design makes more sense as a practical tool than as a religious symbol. The builders needed to calculate precise angles and measurements, not to honor the gods, but to ensure their shelter would stand against the enormous stresses of Ice Age weather while providing optimal thermal efficiency and structural stability. As your breathing deepens and sleep approaches, envision a landscape dotted with these stone sanctuaries, each one a beacon of human survival in a world gone white with cold. The Great Pyramid wasn't built in isolation. It was part of a network of shelters that stretched along the ice-free corridors where human communities could survive. Along what we now call the Nile Valley, but which was then a lifeline through otherwise uninhabitable frozen wilderness, other pyramid complexes rose. Each was slightly different, built by communities with their own innovations and adaptations to local conditions. Some were taller and narrower, designed for smaller groups that needed maximum thermal efficiency. Others were broader and lower, built by communities that had discovered local sources of fuel that allowed them to heat larger spaces. These communities weren't isolated from each other. During the brief summer months, when travel was possible, they maintained trade networks that were essential for survival. Communities that had access to good stone quarries traded their building materials for preserved food from communities in more fertile areas. Those with access to metal ores traded tools and weapons for the furs and leather that everyone needed to survive the brutal winters. The smaller pyramids that surround the Great Pyramid weren't subsidiary tombs for queens and nobles. They were specialized structures within the survival network. Some served as workshops where essential tools were manufactured during the winter months. Others were storage facilities designed with particular attention to preventing spoilage and pest infestation of the precious stores that would carry the community through times when hunting and gathering were impossible. The temple complexes associated with the pyramids served practical rather than religious functions in our scenario. These were meeting places where the leaders of different communities could gather during the brief travel seasons to share information, coordinate activities, and make the crucial decisions that affected everyone's survival. The formal architecture and decoration that archaeologists interpret as religious symbolism may have actually been practical communication systems, visual codes that conveyed important information about resource availability, weather patterns, and potential dangers. The boat pits found near the pyramids weren't meant to carry pharaohs to the afterlife, but were practical storage for the vessels that provided transportation and communication between communities during the brief periods when the rivers weren't frozen solid. These boats were lifelines, carrying not just goods and people, but crucial information about conditions in other areas of the network. The extensive mortuary complexes associated with the pyramids take on different meanings as well. Rather than being focused on the afterlife, these may have been medical and quarantine facilities. In a world where a single infected individual could doom an entire community confined in close quarters through a long winter, sophisticated systems for dealing with illness and death were matters of survival, not religious observance. The famous pyramid texts that would later appear in Egyptian burial chambers may have originally been practical manuals, instructions for operating the complex. Life support systems of these Ice Age shelters, records of successful survival techniques, and warnings about mistakes that had led to disaster in the past. Archaeological evidence suggests that the pyramid building tradition spread far beyond Egypt during the time periods we're imagining. Similar structures, built with local materials and adapted to local conditions, appeared across the world wherever human communities struggled to survive in harsh climates. The stepped pyramids of the Americas, the burial mounds of Europe, and even some of the megalithic structures of Asia may represent echoes of this same fundamental innovation. The discovery that large, precisely built stone structures could mean the difference between survival and extinction. The construction of these monumental shelters wasn't accomplished in a single generation or even a single century. Archaeological evidence suggests that the Great Pyramid in particular represents the accumulated work of dozens of generations, each adding improvements and refinements based on their experience of surviving in the structure. The earliest version of the Great Shelter was probably a simple stone pile, not much different from the smaller pyramids that dotted the landscape. But as each generation lived through winters in the structure, they identified problems and developed solutions. Cold spots in the interior led to adjustments in the chamber design. Structural weaknesses exposed during earthquakes or severe weather led to reinforcement and modification of the building techniques. This gradual evolution explains some of the mysteries that have puzzled archaeologists about pyramid construction. The evidence of different construction techniques in different parts of the structure isn't the result of changing religious practices or different pharaohs. It's the natural result of technological evolution over centuries of practical experience. The enormous workforce required for pyramid construction becomes more understandable in our survival scenario. These weren't slaves laboring to glorify god-kings, but community members working to ensure their own survival and that of their children. During the brief summer months, every able-bodied person would have contributed to the essential work of improving and expanding their winter shelter. The sophisticated logistics evident in pyramid construction, the quarrying, transportation, and precise placement of millions of tons of stone represent solutions to practical problems rather than exercises in royal megalomania. Moving stone efficiently meant the difference between having adequate shelter when winter came and facing the cold in inadequate structures that might collapse under the weight of accumulated ice and snow. The precision of the interior chambers and passages wasn't motivated by religious symbolism, but by the need to maximize the thermal efficiency of the structure. Heat loss through poorly fitted stones or inadequately designed air circulation systems could literally mean death for the inhabitants. The famous precision of pyramid construction, with joints so tight that a knife blade can't fit between the stones, was a matter of survival engineering, not artistic achievement. The alignment and positioning of the pyramids in relation to each other may have served practical communication purposes. Signal fires lit on the pyramid tops could relay messages between communities across the valley, warning of approaching storms, coordinating hunting expeditions, or calling for help during emergencies. The extensive road and causeway systems associated with the pyramids weren't ceremonial processional routes, but practical infrastructure for moving people and supplies between the different structures in the network. During blizzards or extreme cold, these covered and protected pathways could mean the difference between life and death for anyone who needed to travel between structures. Within the stone sanctuaries, as the endless winter nights passed in the flickering light of oil lamps, a remarkable civilization flourished. Cut off from the outside world for months at a time, the inhabitants of these structures developed sophisticated systems of knowledge preservation and transmission that would influence human development for millennia to come. The long winter nights provided time for activities that would have been impossible during the constant struggle for survival that characterized life outside the shelters. Freed from the immediate need to hunt, gather, and build, community members could specialize in activities that served the long-term survival of the group. The astronomers we mentioned earlier were just one group of specialists who emerged within these communities. Others included master builders who maintained and improved the structures, healers who developed sophisticated medical knowledge based on the injuries and illnesses that arose from life in harsh conditions, and historians who maintained the oral traditions that preserved essential survival knowledge. Perhaps most importantly, these communities developed the world's first formal educational systems. Children born within the stone sanctuaries learned not just the basic skills needed for survival, but specialized knowledge that would be essential for maintaining the complex systems that kept the community alive. Some learned the intricate astronomy needed to predict weather patterns. Others mastered the engineering principles needed to maintain and improve the structures. Still others became experts in the complex social systems needed to govern large groups of people living in close quarters under stressful conditions. This educational specialization may explain one of the great mysteries of ancient Egypt, the sudden appearance of sophisticated mathematical, engineering, and astronomical knowledge that seems to have no obvious precedents. In our scenario, this knowledge wasn't developed suddenly, but was the accumulated wisdom of dozens of generations of people whose survival depended on understanding these principles. The hieroglyphic writing system that would later characterize Egyptian civilization may have had its origins in these Ice Age communities. Living in structures where every surface was stone, the inhabitants would have naturally developed systems for marking and recording information directly on the walls. What began as practical notation, marking storage areas, recording resource inventories, noting important dates and observations, could have evolved over time into the sophisticated writing system that would preserve Egyptian knowledge for thousands of years. The artistic traditions that would later flourish in Egyptian civilization may also have roots in these ancient communities. The long winter nights provided time for creative expression, and the stone walls of the shelters provided permanent canvases for artistic work. More practically, visual art may have served important communication functions, providing visual records of important information that needed to be preserved even if the people who created the records didn't survive. The complex religious and mythological systems that characterized later Egyptian civilization may have evolved from the practical wisdom traditions of these Ice Age communities. Stories about gods and goddesses may have originally been allegorical ways of preserving essential survival knowledge, personified representations of weather patterns, seasonal changes, and natural phenomena that could be memorized and passed down even by people who couldn't read or write. As the last ice age gradually ended, beginning around 15,000 years ago, the communities that had survived in their stone sanctuaries faced new challenges. The world was warming, but this wasn't necessarily good news for people who had spent generations adapting to life in a frozen world. The melting ice brought floods on a scale that's hard to imagine today. Rivers that had been frozen streams became raging torrents. Areas that had been dry land for millennia were suddenly underwater. The carefully planned locations of the pyramid shelters, chosen for their protection from Ice Age weather, sometimes proved vulnerable to the new climate conditions. Some communities abandoned their stone sanctuaries, following the changing landscape, to new territories that offered better opportunities in the warming world. Others adapted their ancient shelters to new purposes, transforming survival structures into the foundations of permanent settlements that would eventually grow into cities. The Great Pyramid and its associated structures may have undergone just such a transformation. As the climate warmed and the immediate need for winter shelter decreased, the massive structure found new purposes. Its large internal chambers, originally designed to house entire communities during harsh winters, became storage facilities, meeting halls, and eventually perhaps ceremonial spaces as the practical origins of the structures were gradually forgotten. The sophisticated astronomical knowledge that had been essential for survival in the Ice Age climate found new applications in the warming world. The ability to predict seasonal changes became crucial for agriculture rather than for survival. The mathematical and engineering knowledge that had been necessary for building life-sustaining shelters could be applied to irrigation systems, permanent buildings, and other infrastructure needed by growing permanent settlements. The social organization that had developed within the close confines of the winter shelters may have provided the foundation for the complex hierarchical societies that would characterize later Egyptian civilization. The leadership structures, dispute resolution systems, and resource management techniques that had been essential for survival in the pyramids could be scaled up and adapted to govern much larger populations in permanent settlements. The writing systems that may have developed within the stone sanctuaries found new purposes in record-keeping for trade, governance, and eventually literature and religious expression. The artistic traditions that had flourished during the long winter nights evolved into the sophisticated aesthetic traditions that would make Egyptian art instantly recognizable for thousands of years, but perhaps most importantly, the memory of what had been accomplished during the Ice Age, the successful survival of entire communities through climate conditions that seemed impossible to survive, may have instilled in these people a confidence in human ingenuity and determination that would drive Egyptian civilization to remarkable achievements in engineering, art, science, and governance. As you drift deeper into sleep, consider how this alternate history might explain some of the enduring mysteries of the pyramids. The sophisticated engineering that seems to appear suddenly in human history makes more sense as the culmination of thousands of years of practical experience. The astronomical alignments that seem too precise to be accidental become understandable as the product of generations of life or death observations. Even the religious significance that the pyramids acquired in later Egyptian civilization might have roots in this Ice Age origin. Structures that had literally saved entire communities from extinction would naturally acquire sacred significance. The association of pyramids with death and the afterlife might echo dim memories of times when these structures were the only things standing between the living and death from cold and starvation. The mummification practices that became central to Egyptian culture might have originated in the practical necessities of dealing with death in the confined spaces of Ice Age shelters. Bodies that couldn't be buried in frozen ground would need to be preserved until burial became possible, leading to the development of preservation techniques that would eventually become elaborate religious practices. The emphasis on the afterlife that characterized Egyptian religion might reflect the experiences of people who lived for months at a time in underground chambers, cut off from the sun and the outside world. The journey through the underworld, described in Egyptian religious texts, might be metaphorical descriptions of the experience of surviving winter in the pyramid shelters, waiting for the return of warmth and light that would allow life to resume. Outside, the complex pantheon of Egyptian gods and goddesses might preserve personified memories of the natural forces that governed life and death during the Ice Age. The sun god Ra, who died each night and was reborn each morning, might echo memories of the brief appearances of the sun during Ice Age winters. The goddess Isis, who brought her husband back from death, might represent the return of warmth and life each spring after the apparent death of winter. Even the famous curse associated with disturbing the pyramids might have practical origins. Structures that contained the remains of Ice Age communities, along with whatever diseases might have preserved in the cold conditions, would indeed be dangerous to enter without proper precautions. Stories about curses might have been practical warnings dressed up in supernatural language. The enduring fascination that the pyramids hold for modern people might reflect some deep genetic memory of a time when such structures meant survival itself. The awe that these monuments inspire might echo the reverence that our ancestors felt for structures that literally kept them alive through impossible conditions. In our gentle journey through this imagined history, we can find lessons that resonate even today. The communities that survived in these stone sanctuaries succeeded not through individual heroism or superior technology, but through cooperation, careful planning, and the willingness to work together toward common goals, even when the work was difficult and the benefits were not immediate. The builders of these shelters understood something that we sometimes forget in our modern world, that survival often depends on the ability to plan not just for the immediate future, but for challenges that might not arise for years or even generations. They built structures that were far larger than they immediately needed, not out of vanity or waste, but because they understood that survival margins matter when conditions become extreme. They also understood the importance of preserving and transmitting knowledge. The sophisticated engineering, astronomical observations, and social organization that enabled their survival didn't develop spontaneously. They were the product of countless generations of careful observation, experimentation, and knowledge sharing. The educational systems that developed within these communities ensured that hard-won survival knowledge wasn't lost when individuals died. Perhaps most importantly, these ancient communities understood that survival in harsh conditions requires both practical skills and cultural practices that maintain morale and social cohesion. The art, music, storytelling, and ritual activities that flourished during the long winter nights weren't luxuries or distractions from the serious business of survival. They were essential elements that maintained the psychological and social health of the communities. The network of communities connected by trade and communication demonstrates another crucial principle: that isolated communities, no matter how well prepared, are vulnerable in ways that interconnected communities are not. The ability to share resources, information, and assistance with neighboring communities provided resilience that no single community could achieve on its own. As our imagined history draws toward a close, and as sleep approaches for you, dear listener, consider how this alternate explanation for the pyramids raises as many questions as it answers. If these structures were indeed Ice Age shelters, what happened to the communities that built them? Why was their true purpose forgotten? How did the transformation from survival shelters to religious monuments occur? Perhaps the answer lies in the very success of these ancient peoples. As the Ice Age ended and life became easier, the desperate innovations that had been necessary for survival during the harsh millennia may have seemed less important to preserve. Children born into a warming world might have had difficulty understanding why their ancestors had gone to such extraordinary lengths to build these massive structures. Oral traditions that had once preserved essential survival knowledge might have evolved into mythological stories as the practical contexts that gave them meaning disappeared. Technical instructions for operating complex life support systems might have been transformed into religious rituals as their original purposes were forgotten. The transformation of the pyramids from practical shelters to religious monuments might have been gradual, occurring over many generations as each successive community added new meanings and purposes to structures whose original functions were becoming increasingly irrelevant to their daily lives. This process of cultural evolution, the transformation of practical knowledge into religious tradition, might help explain why so many ancient cultures around the world developed similar stories about great floods, catastrophic climate changes, and heroic survivals against impossible odds. These might not be entirely mythological stories, but cultural memories of real events preserved in the only forms that could survive the passage of millennia. The precision and sophistication of the pyramids that seems so mysterious to modern archaeologists might be the result of this same cultural evolution. Each generation that inherited these structures and needed to maintain them would have added their own improvements and refinements, gradually transforming relatively simple survival shelters into the architectural marvels that we see today. Fact that similar pyramid structures appear in cultures around the world that seem to have had no contact with each other might not be evidence of ancient global civilizations or visits from extraterrestrial beings, but simply proof that the pyramid shape represents an optimal solution to certain engineering problems. Communities facing similar challenges, the need to build large, stable structures using primitive tools and materials, might naturally develop similar solutions. As you settle into the deepest phases of sleep, let your mind contemplate the vast silence of deep time that separates us from these imagined Ice Age communities. 15,000 years is an almost incomprehensible span of time from a human perspective. More than 500 generations of human lives, each lasting perhaps 30 years. In that vast span of time, languages disappear entirely, leaving no trace. Writing systems are forgotten. Entire ways of life vanish so completely that later peoples can't even imagine how their ancestors lived. Cities turn to dust. Mountains are worn down by erosion. Rivers change their courses. Even the shapes of continents shift. And yet stone endures. The pyramids that rise from the desert near Cairo are among the oldest surviving human constructions on Earth. They have outlasted the civilizations that built them, the languages those civilizations spoke, the religions they practiced, and the problems those religions were meant to solve. They have survived conquest and earthquake, flood and drought, the rise and fall of empires. If these monuments were indeed Ice Age shelters transformed over millennia into religious sites, their survival represents something almost miraculous. The persistence of human achievement across time spans that dwarf recorded history. The people who built them, whatever their original purposes, created something that would outlast everything else they ever made or thought or believed. This permanence carries its own mystery. Why do the pyramids survive when so much else has vanished? Is it simply the durability of stone, or is there something about the form itself, the pyramid shape, the massive scale, the precise construction that enables structures to endure across geological time? Perhaps the answer lies in the original purpose we've imagined for these structures. Buildings designed for survival, constructed with the care and precision that life or death necessity demands, would naturally be built to last. Every aspect of their construction would be tested against the harshest possible conditions. Anything that could fail would fail, and only the techniques and designs that could withstand the ultimate tests would be preserved and passed down. In this sense, the pyramids might be the ultimate expression of human engineering, not because they were built to impress the gods or glorify kings, but because they were built by people who understood that their lives depended on getting every detail right. Now, as sleep draws near and your conscious mind begins to rest, let your dreaming mind wander through the corridors of these ancient shelters. Imagine yourself as one of those Ice Age inhabitants, living through the long winter nights in chambers carved from stone, warmed by the body heat of your community, sustained by stories and songs that carry the wisdom of generations. Feel the weight of the stone above you, not oppressive but protective, like a warm blanket against the killing cold outside. Listen to the muted howl of the wind, blocked by tons of carefully fitted stone from reaching you in your safe haven. See the flickering light of oil lamps casting dancing shadows on walls that have protected human life for longer than recorded history. In your dream, you are part of something larger than yourself, a community that has chosen survival over surrender, ingenuity over despair. You contribute your labor to the endless work of maintaining and improving the shelter that keeps everyone alive. You share your knowledge and learn from others, participating in the great collective effort that enables human civilization to persist through the darkest and coldest times in our species' history. Around you, children play games that teach essential survival skills. Elders share stories that preserve the accumulated wisdom of the community. Craftspeople create tools and art that serve both practical and spiritual needs. Astronomers track the movements of stars that predict the weather changes on which everyone's survival depends. You are warm, you are safe, you are part of a community that cares for its members and plans for the future. The Ice Age storms that rage outside cannot touch you here in your stone sanctuary. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, but you will face them together with people who share your commitment to survival and your hope for the future. And when spring finally comes, when the ice begins to retreat and the world begins to warm, you will emerge from your stone shelter into sunlight and growing things, carrying with you the knowledge and the community bonds that enabled you to survive the impossible winter. You will help plan the improvements that will make next winter's survival even more certain, and you will teach the children the skills and wisdom they will need to continue the great work of human survival and flourishing. As you rest now in your comfortable bed, in your heated home, with tomorrow's weather forecast available at the touch of a button, remember the imagined ancestors who built shelters of stone against the ultimate winter. Whether the pyramids were actually Ice Age shelters or the tombs of pharaohs, they remain monuments to human determination, ingenuity, and the refusal to surrender in the face of impossible challenges. The true pyramid builders, whether they were Ice Age survivors or ancient Egyptians, shared certain essential qualities with each other and with us. The ability to envision solutions to problems that seemed insurmountable, the willingness to work toward goals whose benefits might not be realized for generations, and the understanding that human survival and flourishing depend on our ability to cooperate and share knowledge across time and space. Tonight, as you sleep safely in your modern shelter, you are the beneficiary of thousands of years of human ingenuity and determination. The roof over your head, the heat that warms you, the knowledge that comforts you, all are the products of countless generations of people who refused to accept that survival was impossible, who built and improved and passed down the tools and wisdom that make your comfort and safety possible. Sleep well, knowing that you too are part of this great human story of survival and ingenuity. Dream of stone and ice, of ancient wisdom and eternal hope. And when you wake, carry with you the knowledge that humans have always found ways to build shelters against whatever storms the world might bring. Shelters not just of stone and wood and metal, but of community and knowledge and shared determination. To see tomorrow's sunrise, the pyramids rise eternal from the desert, mysteries in stone that capture our imagination and challenge our understanding. Whether they were built as tombs for god-kings or shelters for Ice Age survivors, they remain proof that humans can create things that outlast the civilizations that built them, monuments to the enduring power of human creativity and determination. Sleep now and dream of the eternal human journey from darkness into light, from cold into warmth, from isolation into community, from survival into flourishing. The ancient builders, whoever they were and whatever their purposes, would recognize in your peaceful sleep the ultimate success of their efforts, a world where humans rest safely through the night, protected by the accumulated wisdom and care of all the generations that came before. Sweet dreams, and may your rest be as peaceful as if you slept in the heart of an ancient pyramid, protected by stone and warmed by the eternal human spirit that refuses to surrender to the dark. And so ends our gentle journey through an imagined history, where the mysteries of the pyramids find new explanations in the ultimate human story of survival against impossible odds. Rest well, dreamer, in the knowledge that human ingenuity and determination have always found ways to build tomorrow's hope from today's challenges.